As Bobby Wilson lights our chalice this morning, I read these words to you from Bets Wienicke. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within and around us.
This morning, as we gather together around this flame, we acknowledge that what is going on beyond our doors, in our wider world, and the darkness that befalls so many. It is here together in worship where we bring out into the light what lingers in our hearts and minds. In the words of the Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling, there is nothing in the dark that isn't there when the lights are on. Yes. Let us open ourselves to the mystery and shine our light brightly as a community of seekers and people committed to love. Come now and let us worship together. There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. From the laughter I get, many of you recognize this iconic opening for the TV show from the 50s and 60s. The Twilight Zone, like I was telling the children earlier, was a weekly program that ran for 5 years, a mixture of science fiction, irony, social commentary, and horror. There were themes in the show such as war, the hydrogen bomb, alien invasion, cannibalism, a totalitarian state. And although science fiction from 60 years ago, I think that the Twilight Zone has a lot to teach us today. The creator of the show, Unitarian Rod Serling, believed that his role as a writer was to menace the public conscience. He used several of his own scripts in the show and described them as vehicles of social criticism. Through actors and creative storylines, he addressed social and moral issues like prejudice, absolutism, conformity, and totalitarianism. He displayed his values in his work by inviting us into impossible situations, challenging us to think about what we believe, and urging us to critically examine how we behave. Through a television program, we came face to face with our own learned hatred, our own misguided quest for power, our own allegiance to systems of oppression. What an incredibly effective use of imagination. I suggest to you this morning that imagination is vitally important to all of us. It's the seed that grows into the beautiful flower. It's the vehicle through which great ideas become life-giving products. This dimension of imagination lives in each one of us, and we can use it to make the world a better place for ourselves and for others. When we tap into the innate imagination, our expressions of love, forgiveness, healing, and joy are revealed in the most astonishing and beautiful ways possible. In the Twilight Zone, there are no limits to the new insights revealed through our creative approach. More depth, more substance, more movement, more love. What does it mean to you to be in that space between light and shadow, between fear and knowledge? What might you discover there? What might you come to know about mystery? How might you change your approach to justice? Continuing with our monthly theme of curiosity, the Twilight Zone demonstrates how imagination can become what Serling described as a weapon of truth, an article of faith, an act of courage. We can use our creativity to live out our Unitarian Universalist values as people who cherish both religious freedom and individual agency. We possess a unique approach for utilizing creativity as a form of resistance. I don't know about you, but this week in particular has felt kind of like a dystopian novel. Perhaps because I've been reading a lot about people suffering, what with our inhumane immigration policies, the daily impact of white supremacist heteropatriarchy, and the draconian reproductive rights legislation that was written into law. It's a very scary time for all of us. Not just middle and upper class white cisgender women for whom the recent restrictive measures to eliminate abortion access seems to affect. It's a scary time for all of us. But it's a particularly dangerous time for those of us with less power and less status. I name white cisgender women with means because for those of us who live with privilege, we may feel that the world is crumbling around us. Perhaps for the first time, we're beginning to feel what those of us who live with economic uncertainty have felt for a long time. What those of us who live with the daily, lifelong experience of racism and discrimination have always known deep in their bones. What those of us who live with the incessant condemnation and erasure of our very being because we're sexual and gender minorities, what we live with every day. These new laws are horrendous, and it's right for us to fight them. It's also extremely important that we also address the inequality inherent in the systems that make abortion unattainable for people of color and poor communities right now before Roe v. Wade is challenged in court. As a white cisgender woman myself, I am incensed at the latest legislative moves to control women. These laws and statutes that force women and people with uteruses into impossible positions and remove access to health care for them. I also recognize that this latest wave of anti-women, anti-abortion, anti-health care onslaught greatly increases the already restrictive and punitive systems that harm and control non-binary and trans people of color and poor communities. There are states with only one reproductive health clinic that offers abortion services in the entire state. There are communities refused access to accurate sex education and contraception. The cost and restriction of our current healthcare system leave many without options. And disability activists have been crying out and rising up against these systems that are literally killing them. Those of us who are persecuted know that the system is stacked against us. Whether it is this vital fight or another form of oppression that is ongoing and harming those we love and ourselves, now is the time for all of us to do something. Even if you aren't personally being attacked yet, there are those in our community who are. And our faith demands that we take action to ease suffering. that we take action to dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and transphobia and any form of injustice and oppression. Now is when we need the Twilight Zone and that dimension of imagination as we figure out what to do, how to overcome. Christian theologian Walter Brueggemann writes in The Prophetic Imagination, "It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing alternative futures. We are in a time now when we are being called to resist, to protect the progress of past generations, and continue to work toward more equality, to work for justice. We are called to creatively reimagine what it means to love one another, what it means to rise up against tyranny, and to work together for collective liberation." Trappist monk Thomas Merton said, "You do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment, and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope." What can we do? How do we resist? There are many varied answers, my friends. And I tell you that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are communities of color, people who are oppressed, who have been fighting these systems for a long time. We draw from these communities and their leadership. We center their voices and their wisdom. And we can conceive of new ways to create a just, loving society right here, right now, through our exploration in this Twilight Zone dimension of imagination. The power of our imagination and the fruits of our curious search for a better way lead us to ask, what more can this be? What else do I have to learn? Who can I become? And what can I do to make the world a better place? To undo injustice, to make love manifest. As I was preparing for this sermon, I rewatched a few Twilight Zone episodes, looking for inspiration, although I admit that I know several episodes by heart because I've watched them so many times. But even though I watched some of those episodes, what kept coming to mind were snippets from some disaster movies, another genre that I like. Get to know a little about my preferences this morning. First, there's the Titanic, the 1997 version. The story that's obviously based on actual events of the ship that sank in 1912. This version includes the Hollywood love story, and it's a big production. What sticks out about this movie, and speaks to my inner sociologist, is the depiction of how the people in third class, they're referred to as steerage, how they were treated when the ship began sinking. In this version of the story, crew members actually locked the gates and trapped people below deck so as to avoid panic and to accommodate the first-class passengers with little fuss and muss. Just think about that. They locked them in, and they had no chance of survival being locked below deck. Next is the Poseidon adventure, in which, if you're not familiar, there's a cruise ship that turns upside down, and the remaining passengers have to decide if they're going to travel through the ship to try and get out, or wait there for someone to come and rescue them. One character states, when asked if he would join the group searching for an exit, that he can't leave the hurting people around him. He figures that they would all die, which turns out to be true, but he effectively names another form of resistance. Caring for those who are hurting and dying right here and right now. Staying present with and for. While others go another direction, this character stays in the despair and loves people right there. The last movie that I'm going to pitch to you this morning is the movie 2012. This movie is based on the prediction that the world was going to end in 2012. I'm pretty sure it didn't, because we're here. In this movie, there's stories of different people learning. It's a story of how them learning that there's this impending collapse of life on Earth. I hope I'm not sending too many spoilers, but all these movies are older, so hopefully we eventually find out that some people with power and money have secretly created these ark-like structures to save a number of humans and animals. The system for determining who got access to the ships, ultimately who got to live and who would certainly die, was like a microcosm of the injustice and inequality we see across the globe today. Those with power and privilege had a much more likely chance of survival when all else fell away. Now, I'm mentioning these movies not to distract from the message, but because I want to elevate the creative use of this particular medium for bringing these issues front and center for us to wrestle with. Again, Rod Serling's Menace the Public Conscience. What these movies have in common is how they show the protagonists choosing a moral path through the chaos. In Titanic, the hero helps break the gates open that are imprisoning the third-class passengers, offering them at least a chance at survival. In the Poseidon adventure, the leader of the group moves the survivors through a harrowing journey to get to safety, only to give his life in the end to ensure their safe passage. This selfless sacrifice comes with his impassioned plea to God about why is all of this necessary. And in 2012, one of the main characters risks his life for someone that he can't stand, goes back and rescues this guy, while another character pushes back against the classist survival of the wealthiest plan. We see humanity wiped out and are left to figure out our feelings about those who survived and at what cost. These are all movies done in cinematic fashion based on a screenplay that somebody wrote. It's fiction, whether it's based on actual events or just completely made up. Similarly to what Rod Serling did with the themes and messages in the Twilight Zone, these creative expressions inspire questions of morality and justice, like who has the power and how is it wielded over and against people who hold different identities? Why are certain segments of the population permitted to dictate the rules for the rest of us? And in what ways are you and I part of that ruling class? In what ways do I unknowingly lock the doors to people on other decks or plan an escape route for others like me while leaving so many behind to die? Perhaps most poignantly, this raises the question of who is disposable? I said these movies inspired questions of morality and justice. I think they also inspire questions of faith. Who is disposable? As a Unitarian Universalist, I have to follow that question with, why is anyone disposable? Why is anyone disposable? No one is. No one is disposable. Naturalist John Muir said, "The power of imagination makes us infinite." Now is the time for the Twilight Zone kind of thinking, for an imaginative approach to change. And it's on us to be that change. So let us imagine the world as we know it can be. Let us envision the beloved community where all people are welcome at the table and no one is left out or abandoned. Let us reach across our chasms of difference, live our radical principles of love and justice, and use what we've learned in the Twilight Zone, in our own dimension of imagination, to stir us to action. We are in this work together, my friends, each one of us. Let us unlock the door with the key of imagination and enter into another dimension, a dimension of justice, a dimension of equality, a dimension of love. May it be so, and amen.